Get your hands off my seat. Lady,
There's a count.
you people think you own the place? The officer's voice sliced through the soft hum of morning chatter inside Capitol Diner. For a moment, time stood still. Forks froze midair. Cups trembled in startled hands. And at the center of it all sat a 75-year-old woman, her silver hair glinting under the neon light, her face calm yet firm. That was Eleanor Thompson, retired teacher, widow of a man beaten by police in 1974, and mother of the most powerful lawman in America. She didn't know this moment would split the city in half before sunset. Before going into this story, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. If you believe truth deserves a voice, hit subscribe, give this video a like, and stay till the end. What happens next shook Washington, D.C. to its core. Eleanor's day began like any other Tuesday, 6 o'clock sharp. In her small brownstone apartment in Shaw, the morning light touched framed photos on her mantel. Her husband, Harold, in his army uniform, lost long ago to the kind of police violence that never made the news. A faded picture of her with Dr. King, arms linked in Montgomery, and her son Marcus in his FBI director's pinstripe suit. She moved slowly, but with a grace that came from decades of discipline. She made her coffee the old way, in the same dented copper pot she'd used for 40 years. The smell filled the air, comforting and familiar. She placed fresh flowers on the kitchen table, a habit she never broke, even after Harold died, at 75. Eleanor was sharp, measured, and proud of it. The city had changed around her, new condos, new neighbors, old ghosts. But she remained a fixture of the community, known for tutoring neighborhood kids and writing letters to local papers about equality and empathy. That morning, she called her son, just as she did every Tuesday. "Marcus, did you eat breakfast?" she asked, her voice steady and warm. "Ma, I'm in a meeting," he whispered, a hint of affection under the formality. "Meetings can wait. You can't lead the FBI on an empty stomach." He sighed, smiling on the other end. "Fine. I'll grab something. Let my driver take you today, okay? D.C. Traffic's getting worse. Marcus. No, I can walk 2 blocks. Capitol Diner's been my place since before you were born. I'm not letting some escort car turn it into a press event." He chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, Ma, just be careful." She hung up and put on her cobalt blue coat, pinned with her old Howard University alumni badge. Her purse carried only 2 things, a leather-bound notebook and her late husband's wedding ring, which she wore on a chain as she stepped outside. The air carried the smell of rain and roasted coffee from the corner bakery. The city was waking up, bus brakes hissing, kids in uniforms laughing, and construction drills echoing in the distance. Across the river, in a cluttered apartment in Arlington, Officer Derek Harlan was also pouring coffee, though his morning tasted bitter for different reasons. His hands trembled as he lifted the mug. The night before, he'd gambled away money he didn't have, $75,000 owed to the kind of people who didn't forgive. The man in the mirror looked back with bloodshot eyes and 20 years of resentment etched into every wrinkle. He put on his Metropolitan Police Department uniform, the one that still earned him nods from his neighbors, though none knew what he'd become, a man desperate, cornered, and hiding behind the last thing that gave him power, his badge. He left his small apartment with a mind full of numbers, debt, deadlines, and the dangerous promise of easy money. At the Capitol Diner, a contact was waiting in the corner booth. Derek wasn't going there for pancakes. He was going to exchange confidential MPD internal affairs files for cash. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. By the time Eleanor arrived at the diner, the lunch crowd hadn't yet begun, The old brick walls were lined with pictures of jazz legends and newspaper clippings from the civil rights era. Linda Ramirez, the owner, waved from behind the counter. "Morning, Ms. Thompson, booth 6, right?" "As always." Eleanor smiled. "And some grits for Grace when she gets here." Grace Wilkins, her best friend for 50 years, soon joined, cane in one hand, laughter in the other. The two women sat together every Tuesday, talking about everything from politics to grandkids. Always in that same booth, they had survived marches, riots, and funerals. Nothing scared them anymore. A few tables over, Derek Harlan sat stiffly, waiting. His contact was late. He drummed his fingers, trying to calm the knot in his chest. His police folder rested beside him, a stack of incriminating reports about dirty payouts and missing evidence. When Eleanor reached for the sugar jar, her elbow brushed the edge of his table. A small accident, the kind that happens 1,000 times a day. But this time, it sent his cup tumbling. Hot coffee splashed across his papers. The brown liquid spread over names, figures, and secrets he couldn't afford to lose. His pulse spiked. Without thinking, he grabbed her wrist. "Watch it! Lady!" he barked. Eleanor blinked, startled. "Oh my goodness! I'm so sorry! Let me get some napkins!" But he wasn't hearing her. His eyes locked on her face, on her skin, and something ugly inside him rose up. "You people!" he spat, voice shaking with fury, always causing trouble, always playing the victim. Grace gasped. "Excuse me, young man, that's no way to—" "Shut your mouth, Nurse Ratched," he snapped. The diner went silent. Derek's anger, fed by years of hate and fear, boiled over. The slap came out of nowhere, sharp, loud, echoing off the walls. Eleanor's head turned with the force. Her husband's ring slipped from the chain, clattering to the tiled floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then a young woman at the counter lifted her phone. The camera caught everything. The shock, the tears in Grace's eyes, the cold fury on Derek's face. 12 seconds later, the video hit the internet. Outside, the Capitol's flag fluttered in the distance, unaware that in a single diner, the nation's next firestorm had begun. By evening, the video would reach 5 million views. By dawn, hashtags would flood every corner of the country, and somewhere inside the Hoover building, an FBI director would see the face of the woman he loved most, bruised, calm, and still holding her dignity, and realize justice was about to get personal. That Tuesday began with 2 cups of coffee in 2 very different kitchens. By nightfall, it became the day Washington learned what happens when hate forgets who it's talking to. The diner clock read 12:15 when the sound that would divide a nation echoed off the brick walls. It began as nothing more than a small accident, a hand reaching for sugar, a nudge against a coffee cup. But in a country already split by anger, sometimes a single spill is enough to ignite a storm. The cup tipped. Scalding coffee poured over the man's papers. The liquid seeped into the edges, blurring official stamps, ink bleeding into an unreadable smear. Officer Derek Harlan jolted to his feet, his chair screeching against the tile. For a heartbeat, the room froze. The clink of silverware stopped mid-air. The jazz tune from the jukebox faded behind the tension, and then his voice cut through the silence. "You clumsy old woman," he growled, his tone more venom than frustration. His hand gripped the edge of the booth, veins pulsing. Eleanor, startled, stood halfway, napkin in hand. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry. Let me pay for the cleaning." "Officer." But Derek wasn't listening. His eyes, once dull with exhaustion, lit with something darker. The quick recognition of color, the twisted impulse of superiority. "You people," he spat, "always ruining things you can't afford to touch." Grace Wilkins, sitting across from Eleanor, gasped. "Excuse me, young man. That's no way to talk to anyone." "Sit down," Nurse Ratched, he snapped. the insult striking with the precision of habit. A hush fell, all around them. Diners exchanged uneasy glances. Some reached for their phones. Eleanor tried to steady her voice. "Sir, there's no need for anger. It was an accident." But Derek heard only defiance, and in that instant, whatever mask of restraint he had worn for 2 decades of policing shattered. He raised his hand. The motion was fast, almost instinctive, a surge of power, frustration, and fear disguised as authority. The slap landed with a sharp crack that silenced the room. Eleanor's head turned with the impact. Her earring fell to the floor, and her late husband's wedding ring, the one she had worn on a chain for 50 years, slipped loose and rolled beneath the counter. Gasps erupted. Grace reached out, trembling. "Eleanor!" Eleanor touched her cheek. The skin burned, not just from the sting, but from the humiliation, a feeling she thought she'd left behind with the marches and protests of her youth. She straightened her posture, her voice, calm but cutting, broke the silence. "You can strike me, officer," she said softly, "but you can't silence me." Near the entrance, a young woman who had been filming her lunch for a social post froze mid-recording, realizing what she had just captured. Her camera caught the moment, the slap, the silence, the ring on the floor, the flash of shame in Derek's eyes that lasted only a second before anger replaced it again. She whispered to herself, "Oh my God," and pressed upload within seconds. The 12-second clip began its journey across the digital bloodstream of America. Derek, breathing heavily, turned toward the manager. "This woman assaulted me," he barked. "Linda Ramirez, owner of Capitol Diner for 30 years, stood her ground. Officer, you need to leave. Now, you telling me to leave?" His hand hovered near his holster, a nervous twitch more than a threat. But the gesture was enough. A father eating with his daughter quickly pulled her close. Grace rose halfway, pointing her cane. "Don't you dare reach for that gun." For a moment, the diner seemed balanced on a knife's edge. Then Derek sneered, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out the door. The sound of his boots on the pavement was the only movement until someone broke the silence. "Did that just happen?" whispered a teenager near the counter. "It's on video," the woman with the phone replied, eyes wide. "It's already live." Eleanor sat back down slowly, still holding the napkin to her cheek. She looked out the window at the bright D.C. afternoon, where life went on as if the world hadn't just shifted. "Grace," she murmured, 50 years later, and still the same battle. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "We fought to be treated like humans. Ellie, we shouldn't have to keep reminding them." By the time Eleanor reached home that afternoon, her name was already trending. The video, titled "MPD Officer Slaps 75-year-old Black Woman in D.C. Diner," had been shared 5 million times within 24 hours. The thumbnail froze the moment of impact. Derek's hand mid-air. Eleanor's face turned away. Hashtags exploded. "Justice for Eleanor." The slap in D.C. still marching. News channels looped the footage while politicians issued carefully worded statements. At first, Derek didn't realize what he had unleashed. Driving back to his station, he felt only a flicker of guilt drowned out by anger. He imagined writing his report. Spinning the story. Suspect became aggressive. Officer responded in defense. It was a script he'd seen work before. When he parked outside the precinct, his phone buzzed. Dozens of notifications, messages from colleagues. Some mocked, some defended, some warned. One said, "Bro, you're on X, not in a good way." He opened the app. There it was, his face, frozen mid-swing, already dissected by millions of strangers. He posted anyway. Entitled "Grifter Spills Coffee. Plays Victim. Hashtag Back the Blue." It got a few hundred likes from the usual corners. Police union accounts, anonymous supporters. For a moment, he felt vindicated. Then he saw the next post, a reply quoting his badge number, a screenshot of his disciplinary file, inside his chest. The first ripple of panic formed. At that same hour, Eleanor's son, Marcus Thompson, was sitting in a high-level Justice Department meeting, unaware of what had happened. Aides were briefing him on counterterrorism protocols when his phone began vibrating non-stop. He ignored it at first. Then he saw the caller ID, Ma. He excused himself and answered. Her voice, steady but fragile, came through. Marcus, I'm fine. I don't want you to worry. He froze. What's wrong? There was an incident. A police officer struck me. He stood still in the hallway, heart pounding. What did you say his name was? Officer Derek Harlan? Badge 4821, but don't make a scene. Baby, just know the truth. He didn't respond for 7 full seconds. Then his tone changed. The voice of the FBI director replacing that of a son. I'll handle it. Ma. The line went dead. Within minutes, Marcus called his deputy, Agent Rico Valdez, civil rights violation. Priority 1. I want everything on Harlan in 4 hours. Internal files, prior complaints, union records, all of it. The system began to stir, quietly, methodically, a son's fury hidden beneath federal protocol. Meanwhile, outside Eleanor's brownstone, reporters began gathering. Neighbors stood with signs. Someone left flowers on her porch. By dusk, the small diner where it all began had turned into a pilgrimage site. The booth she sat in, Booth 6, became a symbol. And Derek Harlan? He sat in his car, staring at his cracked phone screen as his own department issued a statement calling the video under investigation. The words blurred before his eyes. In a lifetime of uniformed impunity, he had finally met a wall higher than his badge. What he didn't yet know was that the woman he struck wasn't just a retired teacher. She was the mother of the man who ran the nation's most powerful investigative agency. And before sunrise, every secret he had ever buried under a blue wall of silence would start crawling into the light. The slap wasn't just a sound, it was a signal, a call across generations that the fight Eleanor's husband died for in 1974 had come full circle. And this time, justice had a name. Inside the J. Edgar Hoover building. A hush hung over the 11th floor conference room. The morning briefing was supposed to be routine. Counterintelligence updates, cyber division reports, a discussion on domestic threats. But as Director Marcus Thompson stared at the frozen image on his tablet, everything else faded away. The screen showed his mother, her cheek bruised, her composure unbroken, sitting at that diner booth he'd visited 100 times as a boy. The caption beneath read, MPD officer slaps 75-year-old black woman, caught on live stream. His staff watched him go still. The room felt cold. No one dared speak. Then Marcus closed the tablet and said quietly, Rico, come with me. Agent Rico Valdez, his deputy, followed him into the private operations suite, a soundproof glass room overlooking Constitution Avenue. Marcus's voice dropped an octave, every word measured. Pull every record on Officer Derek Harlan. Badge number 4821. I want complaints. Use of force reports, financials, disciplinary logs, everything he's ever touched. Rico blinked. Sir, that'll take a day or two. You've got 4 hours, Marcus interrupted. His tone carried no anger, only certainty, the kind of command that leaves no room for debate. Rico nodded and rushed out. Marcus stood alone for a long moment, staring out at the Capitol dome through the glass. He could see reflections of himself layered over the skyline. The nation's top cop, the face of law and order, now reduced to a son staring into the past. His mind flashed back to 1974, to the night his father never came home. He remembered his mother's trembling hands, the police report that called it an altercation gone wrong, and the promise he made at 8 years old. I'll make them answer for what they did. Now, 50 years later, that promise had come due downstairs. The Bureau's data division went into overdrive. Screens flickered as analysts pulled files buried under layers of bureaucracy and coded privilege. By noon, Rico was back, a manila folder in hand and a grim expression on his face. He laid the documents on Marcus's desk. "Sir, you were right to act fast. Harlan's a walking liability." Marcus flipped through the pages. Each line was a wound. 2015, assault complaint filed by a black teenager, age 15. The case was marked unsubstantiated after the body cam footage went missing. 2018, use of force review. Harlan caught on camera using racial slurs during an arrest. The file was reassigned for review and quietly disappeared. 2021, fatal shooting of a food delivery worker mistaken for a suspect. No charges. Police union paid the settlement. 2023, Internal Affairs flagged Harlan for excessive aggression during stops. No disciplinary action. Marcus exhaled slowly. How does a man like this stay on payroll? Rico shrugged. Union cover. Friends in command. The usual shield. He's been protected for years. Marcus's jaw tightened. Not anymore. He picked up his phone and called District Attorney Sophia Chen. Sophia, I need your office on a civil rights assault. Immediately. Federal jurisdiction. Hate crime enhancement. There was a pause on the other end. Marcus, you sound... It's my mother. Silence. Then Sophia's voice softened. Your mother wrote my Harvard recommendation letter. Consider it done. I'll coordinate with DOJ's Civil Rights Division by morning. Make it by tonight, Marcus replied, and hung up. Across the river, at the Metropolitan Police Department headquarters, Commissioner Elena Vasquez was reviewing the same viral clip for the 10th time. The public pressure was relentless. Protesters were gathering outside the building with signs reading, "Hands off our elders and justice for Eleanor." The phones rang nonstop when her desk line flashed with the Department of Justice seal. Vasquez picked up. Commissioner Vasquez. Marcus's voice came through, calm but steely. You've seen the footage? Yes. Director, I'm aware of the situation. Then you know what's coming next. I want Harlan suspended without pay. Effective immediately. Federal investigation begins tonight. Marcus, I can't. You can. And you will. This isn't about optics. It's about law. Her silence was answer enough. 2 hours later, an internal memo hit every MPD inbox. Officer Derek Harlan, badge 4821, suspended pending federal review. When Harlan saw the message, he was sitting in a dive bar off Rhode Island Avenue, nursing his 5th drink. His phone buzzed, notifications flooding in, text messages from fellow officers. They're making you the fall guy. Stay quiet. Union's got your back. Lawyer up. He stared at the screen until his reflection blurred in the beer glass. For years, the badge had been his armor. Now, it was just a weight around his neck. Still, pride dies slowly. He opened his X account and typed another post, entitled Grifter Spills Coffee, Plays the Victim, #BackTheBlue, #TruthWillOut. It gathered likes from the usual voices, but within minutes, fact-checkers replied with footage, timestamps, and his disciplinary record. Then came the FBI seal. The Bureau's verified account had just confirmed an ongoing investigation into the use of force incident involving a Metropolitan Police officer. The tide turned fast. His post was buried under a flood of outrage. By nightfall, news anchors spoke his name like a curse. His address leaked online. Protesters gathered outside his house. His wife, Laura, locked the doors, trembling as camera flashes lit up their front lawn. Their teenage son, Tyler, shouted at her, "Mom, turn off the TV!" But she couldn't. The image of Derek's hand striking that elderly woman played over and over again. Meanwhile, in Eleanor's apartment, things were quiet. She refused interviews, refused sympathy. She sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the world react to something she had already made peace with. Grace Wilkins sat beside her, holding her hand. "You should let Marcus handle this," Grace said softly. "I raised Marcus to serve the law, not to use it for revenge," Eleanor replied. "But maybe, this time, justice and love have to meet halfway." At midnight, Marcus stood alone in his office, lights dim, city below glowing like a restless heartbeat. Rico entered, holding a tablet. "Sir, one more thing. We traced Harlan's finances. He's been in deep debt for months. Gambling, payday loans, and..." Rico hesitated. "There's evidence he's been selling internal documents to a private contractor under investigation for obstruction." Marcus turned, his expression unreadable. "So, on top of assaulting a federal witness, we have corruption and espionage potential." "Yes, sir." Marcus picked up the phone once more. "Judge Esposito, I'm requesting an emergency order to preserve all MPD internal data related to Officer Harlan. No deletions, no overrides, no tampering. Effective immediately." The judge's voice came through, stern but supportive. "You'll have it within the hour, by dawn." The order was signed, for the first time in years. The system moved faster than the silence that usually protects men like Derek Harlan. That morning, a line of black SUVs pulled up outside MPD headquarters. Federal agents entered without a word, collecting servers, data logs, and body cam archives. Reporters swarmed the scene. Headlines exploded. FBI takes over D.C. police investigation after viral assault inside his holding room. Harlan's defiance began to crumble. He slammed his fist against the table. "You can't do this to me! I'm a cop!" The agent across from him simply replied, "Not anymore." Back at the Hoover Building, Marcus looked down at the press conference transcript waiting on his desk. His hand hesitated over the opening line. He wasn't just addressing the nation as a director, he was speaking as a son. He took a deep breath and began to write. "Yesterday, an American citizen, my mother, was assaulted by someone sworn to protect her. Today, we begin the process of restoring faith, not just in justice, but in humanity." He signed his name, set the paper aside, and whispered to himself, "This isn't vengeance. It's history correcting itself. Outside, the sun rose over Washington. Inside, the Bureau's machines hummed, carrying out orders that would unravel 2 decades of hidden misconduct. One call, one mother's quiet voice, had just shaken the most powerful building in America. The next 48 hours turned Washington into a city without sleep. News vans crowded the front of the Metropolitan Police Department, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like weapons of truth. Anchors spoke in urgent tones about a national reckoning, while citizens across the country replayed the same 12-second clip. A single slap that had awakened the conscience of a nation. Inside the Hoover Building, Director Marcus Thompson moved with quiet precision. His mother's dignity had ignited something deeper than outrage. It had triggered the full machinery of federal accountability. At 7 a.m., he stood in the Bureau's Operations Center, surrounded by glowing monitors and agents from the Civil Rights Division. "We're not just investigating one man," he said calmly. "We're dissecting a system that allowed him to exist." His voice carried across the room like a commandment. Screens lit up with years of hidden data, use of force logs, complaint records, union documents, body cam footage marked missing but never deleted. Rico Valdez moved between desks, coordinating teams of analysts, filter every incident involving Harlan, map his supervisors, IA contacts, and who signed off his reports. He instructed, "We're building the chain that kept him untouchable, across town, in the D.C. courthouse." District Attorney Sophia Chen prepared to file federal charges. She had already spoken to Judge Carla Esposito, who agreed to an accelerated schedule under emergency jurisdiction, a move unheard of in federal court. If we delay, Chen told her staff, the public will lose faith that justice still has a pulse. The charges were drafted with surgical precision. Title 18, U.S. Code. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, assault, hate crime enhancement, and obstruction of justice. That same morning, Commissioner Elena Vasquez gathered her senior staff in the MPD command room. Her face looked older than usual, her voice subdued. The Bureau has taken control, she said. This department will comply fully. No leaks, no press games, no union interference. Her deputy shifted uneasily. Ma'am, the union's already pushing back. They're calling it political theater. Vasquez glared. If protecting a woman's dignity is theater, then I'll take front row. Suspend anyone who obstructs this investigation, and find out who's been covering for Harlan all these years. Meanwhile, Derek Harlan sat in a small interview room on the 5th floor of MPD headquarters, his uniform stripped of its insignia, his gun and badge locked in an evidence bag. He stared at the table, sweat collecting under his collar. 2 FBI agents, one male, one female, entered with folders. The man spoke first. Mr. Harlan, you're under federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent. You might want to use it. The woman slid a document toward him. These are the civil rights violations under review. We also have financial records suggesting corruption and document tampering. If you cooperate, you may retain counsel. If not, we'll proceed without you. Derek leaned back, smirking weakly. You people don't know how this works. I'm not your villain. The system made me this way. The female agent tilted her head. Then you just confessed the problem we're here to fix. Outside, protests grew louder. Crowds filled Freedom Plaza, holding candles and signs reading "Hands off our mothers" and "Equal justice." Equal pain. Reporters interviewed civil rights leaders who called Eleanor's restraint the new face of courage. But the story was no longer just about one slap. It had become a referendum on the integrity of American policing itself. CNN ran a live headline. Federal probe into MPD, FBI director's mother at center of national investigation. At 2 p.m., Marcus met privately with Attorney General Lydia Conway. The room was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning. Conway studied the documents in front of her. You realize the optics. Marcus, you're investigating the man who attacked your mother. The opposition will call this personal. Marcus didn't flinch. It is personal, but it's also federal. This bureau doesn't protect my family. It protects the Constitution. Conway nodded slowly. Then let's do this by the book. Full DOJ oversight. Daily reports. External ethics monitor. That way, no one can claim bias. Marcus agreed. I want this investigation clean enough to be taught in law schools. That evening, as rain began to fall over the Capitol, a convoy of unmarked SUVs pulled into the MPD parking lot. Agents in dark suits stepped out, carrying sealed warrants. The building went silent as they entered the records wing. They seized boxes of personnel files, computer drives, and 2 decades of disciplinary archives. A single piece of paper fluttered from one box, a 2015 complaint form from a teenage boy named Andre Miller, marked closed, lack of evidence. The boy was now 19, a sophomore at Yale on a scholarship funded by the Eleanor Thompson Foundation. The circle of fate was tightening. By nightfall, the first arrests within MPD began. 2 officers were charged with evidence destruction. 1 sergeant resigned on the spot. Commissioner Vasquez stood before reporters under the glare of flashing lights. We will not shield misconduct. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities, she said firmly. No badge stands above accountability. Her voice carried conviction and exhaustion inside her brownstone apartment. Eleanor watched the press conference in silence. Grace Wilkins sat beside her, knitting nervously. "You see that?" Grace muttered. "They're finally cleaning house." Eleanor sipped her tea, her voice calm. "Justice isn't cleaning, Grace. It's teaching those who made the mess to pick up the broom." Her phone buzzed. Marcus calling. She answered softly. "Ma, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine. Baby, don't let them turn this into revenge." He exhaled. "It's not revenge. It's reckoning." Across town, in a quiet office of the district courthouse, Judge Esposito reviewed the preliminary motion for expedited trial. "You're telling me the defendant is a police officer with multiple prior incidents and the victim is the FBI director's mother?" she said, raising an eyebrow. Sophia Chen nodded. "That's correct, Your Honor. But the evidence is independent. The victim's identity only underscores the pattern." Esposito closed the file. Thoughtful. "Then let's make history. But we do it clean." She signed the order. Trial date set. 30 days from today. No continuances. It was the fastest scheduling in D.C. federal court history when Derek's attorney received the summons. His face went pale. "They want this public." He warned his client. "You'll be the face of everything wrong with policing in America." Derek laughed bitterly. "I already am." That night, as thunder rolled over the city, Marcus sat in his office staring at a framed photograph of his parents on their wedding day. His father in uniform, his mother radiant. He whispered to himself. He was killed by police. "Ma, now you've lived to see one answer for it." At the same time, in a federal evidence lab across the Potomac, technicians examined Derek's confiscated files. Among them, they discovered a second binder, coded memos, money transfers, and text logs connecting him to a network of officers exchanging confidential data for cash. The name Sentinel Group appeared several times, an unregistered collective suspected of protecting corrupt officers in exchange for favors. Rico called Marcus immediately. "Sir, this isn't just about Derek anymore. It's bigger." Marcus's voice stayed calm. "Then we expand the net. By dawn, 12 subpoenas had been issued, 5 officers placed on leave. The DOJ's Office of Civil Rights prepared a public statement declaring zero tolerance for abuse under color of authority. America watched as the dominoes began to fall. When Eleanor opened her blinds that morning, the sun glinted off the wet streets. Children walked to school past reporters, who nodded respectfully as she passed. She smiled faintly. "The city's waking up." "Grace," she said. Grace adjusted her glasses. "To justice?" Eleanor shook her head. "To conscience. Justice still has to catch up. And somewhere inside the Hoover Building." Marcus Thompson knew she was right. The wheels of law had finally turned, but what they uncovered next would test whether America's conscience could endure the truth it demanded. The morning of the trial began under a gray Washington sky, the kind that made the marble of the courthouse seem even whiter and colder than usual. A light drizzle fell over the crowd gathered outside the E. Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse, activists, journalists, students, veterans, and church elders, all waiting for a glimpse of the 75-year-old woman who had turned a nation's conscience upside down. Reporters whispered as black SUVs pulled up to the curb. Cameras flashed. Out stepped Eleanor Thompson, dressed in a cobalt blue suit and matching hat, her silver hair pinned neatly beneath it. She didn't wear makeup to hide the faint bruise on her cheek. Let them see what truth looks like. She'd told her son that morning. Her steps were slow but deliberate, her chin lifted as if every inch of that walk carried the memory of those who never got the chance to make it this far. Inside. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled. Senators, civil rights advocates, students from Howard University, even clergy members from the 1960s movement sat shoulder to shoulder. The walls of justice had never felt so alive. At the front, Judge Carla Esposito presided, a sharp-minded Italian-American woman in her early 50s with a reputation for fairness and fire. She adjusted her glasses and surveyed the room before speaking. This court recognizes the gravity of the case before it, not for who the parties are, but for what their actions represent. The defendant, Officer Derek Harlan, sat at the defense table in a plain gray suit. The man who once swaggered through precinct halls now looked smaller, his face drawn, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. His wife had not come. She'd filed for separation a week prior. Only his public defender and a police union representative sat beside him. Across the aisle sat the prosecution team, DA Sophia Chen, 2 assistants, and special counsel appointed by the Department of Justice behind them. Marcus Thompson sat quietly, watching, not as the FBI director, but as a son seeking truth within the boundaries of law. Your Honor, Chen began, her voice firm. The evidence will show that on April 2nd, inside Capitol Diner, the defendant, acting under color of authority as a Metropolitan Police officer, committed an unprovoked assault against Ms. Eleanor Thompson, motivated by prejudice, arrogance, and disregard for human dignity. This was not a lapse of temper. It was a learned behavior protected by a system of silence. The courtroom listened in absolute stillness as the first piece of evidence played on screen, the 12-second video that had already been seen by millions. But here, in the hushed air of a federal courtroom, it carried a different weight. The sound of the slap echoed faintly through the speakers, the ring falling to the floor. Eleanor's voice trembling. "You can strike me, officer, but you can't silence me," when the lights came back on. Even Judge Esposito seemed to pause before clearing her throat. The defense stood, a man in his late 40s with a thin voice and tired expression. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, my client has served this city for over 20 years. He suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder due to repeated exposure to violence. The incident was an accident born of stress, not hate." Sophia Chen rose slowly. The evidence will speak louder than excuses. Over the next 2 days, witness after witness took the stand. Linda Ramirez, the diner owner, described the moment with quiet strength. She didn't provoke him, she said, voice firm. She apologized, and he hit her anyway. That's not stress, that's hate in uniform. Then came Grace Wilkins, Eleanor's lifelong friend. She walked to the stand leaning on her cane, her hand shaking as she lifted it for the oath. "I've seen a lot in my life," she said softly, "but I never thought I'd see it again. A uniform raised against a woman old enough to be his mother." The defense tried to discredit them, suggesting misinterpretation, confusion, emotion. But every question only deepened the jury's silence. Then came the surprise witness, a young black man in a suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp but kind. "Name?" asked the prosecutor. "Andre Miller." He replied. Gasps rippled across the room. His name had appeared in the old complaint files unearthed during the investigation. "When I was 15. Officer Harlan beat me outside a convenience store, said I fit a description." The case vanished, but I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Mrs. Thompson. She found out what happened, wrote to my school, and helped me get a scholarship. I'm at Yale now because she believed in me. He paused, his voice trembling. "He broke my body. She rebuilt my life." Derek's face went pale. He stared at his hands, unable to look up. Next came the body cam technician from MPD's Evidence Division, testifying under subpoena. There were dozens of body cam deletions tied to Harlan's ID. Supervisors marked them as technical failures, but those files weren't lost. They were buried. The jury shifted uncomfortably as emails and timestamps appeared on the screen. A pattern of concealment unfolded before their eyes. The final witness was Eleanor herself. When she took the stand, the entire room stood instinctively, not from instruction, but from respect. She adjusted her glasses, her voice soft but steady. "I've spent my life teaching children how to read, how to write, how to tell the truth even when it hurts. That day in the diner, I met a man who had forgotten those lessons. I didn't want to see him punished. I wanted him to understand the cost of what he'd done." "Why didn't you leave when he threatened you?" the prosecutor asked. She smiled faintly. "Because I've been walking away from hate my whole life. I decided to stop." The courtroom fell silent. Even Derek's lawyer lowered his gaze. When it was time for cross-examination, the defense hesitated. "Ms. Thompson," he said carefully, "do you believe Officer Harlan intended to harm you personally?" Eleanor looked at Derek. Her eyes carried no anger, only the quiet weight of truth. "I believe he saw me not as a person, but as a reflection of everything he'd been taught to despise, and that's the tragedy." Her words lingered long after she stepped down. On the final day, both sides delivered closing statements. Chen's voice rang with conviction. "This case isn't about a spilled cup of coffee. It's about every moment we've excused cruelty behind a badge. The law is only as strong as the courage of those who demand it." The defense appealed for mercy, painting Derek as a man undone by pressure, a casualty of a broken system. "If we punish every imperfect man," he argued, "we'll have no one left to wear the uniform." But when the jury retired for deliberation, the verdict was already written in the nation's conscience. 3 hours later, they returned. Judge Esposito's voice was clear and unflinching. On all counts, violation of civil rights, assault, and hate crime, we find the defendant guilty. Derek closed his eyes. His shoulders collapsed inward as if gravity itself had turned against him. Gasps filled the room. Eleanor bowed her head, whispered a prayer. Marcus squeezed her hand. Judge Esposito continued. "Sentencing will occur in 2 weeks. The court acknowledges the extraordinary composure of the victim, whose testimony reminded this chamber what justice should sound like." Outside, the drizzle had stopped. The crowd erupted in applause as Eleanor emerged from the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions, flashes ignited, and chants filled the air. "Justice for Eleanor! Teach the truth! No one above the law!" She smiled gently and said, "Justice doesn't erase pain, but it makes it mean something." Then she turned to Marcus, who stood beside her, tears hidden behind his composure. And in that moment, as the city roared around them, the old teacher who once taught children their ABCs had just taught the nation what accountability looks like. One letter, one lesson, one truth at a time. 2 weeks after the verdict, the courtroom was full again, this time. There were no chants outside, no flashing cameras inside, just a quiet tension, the kind that settles when justice is about to weigh its final judgment. Derek Harlan stood before the bench, his once starched collar now slightly wilted. His lawyer whispered last-minute words that neither believed. Across the aisle, Eleanor sat beside her son Marcus, her blue suit pressed, her hands folded in her lap. The bruise on her cheek had long faded, but the memory had not. When Judge Esposito entered, everyone rose, her voice, firm but not cruel, filled the room. "Mr. Harlan," she began, "this court has reviewed your service record, the testimonies presented, and the impact of your actions. You wore the uniform of public trust, but used it to harm, to degrade, and to divide. This court finds no excuse, only choices." She paused, letting silence fall heavy. "You are sentenced to 24 months in federal custody, 750 hours of community service at the Anacostia Senior Center, permanent forfeiture of your pension, valued at $1.2 million, and lifetime disqualification from law enforcement service." A hush swept through the room. Derek's eyes widened. "Your Honor, She raised a hand. "This isn't a debate. It's consequence." He lowered his gaze. Behind him, a few uniformed officers exchanged uncertain glances. Men who once called him brother now looked at him as a mirror they feared. As the bailiff stepped forward, Derek turned, just for a second, toward Eleanor. He opened his mouth to speak but found no words. She looked back, not with hatred, but with the same quiet grace that had carried her through every storm. In the weeks that followed, the city began to breathe differently. For the first time in years, the phrase equal justice wasn't just painted on banners. It was spoken with belief. The mayor's office announced a review of all use of force cases from the last decade. The Justice Department opened a permanent task force on police accountability. Local newspapers ran headlines that felt almost foreign. System works, for once, inside the federal detention facility in Lorton, Virginia. Derek Harlan began his sentence. Gone was the badge, the authority, the shield of uniformed pride. The man who once barked orders now scrubbed cafeteria floors, folding his sleeves with quiet precision, for months. He refused interviews, letters, reflection. But in the echo of his own silence, remorse began to whisper. He saw things he'd never noticed before. Men he once arrested now teaching him how to use a mop properly. Inmates who called him sir not out of respect, but pity. One afternoon, an elderly volunteer approached him. An old black woman, maybe 80, working with the senior outreach program he'd been assigned to. She handed him a tray of books for the center library. "You're that officer from the news, aren't you?" she asked gently. Derek nodded, expecting anger. Instead, she smiled faintly. "Good. Then you understand what rebuilding feels like." He didn't reply. But that night, for the first time, he wrote something down. One sentence in a small notebook he kept hidden. "I was taught power. I never learned humility." While Derek served time, Eleanor worked on something that would outlast the trial. With help from Marcus, Judge Esposito, and D.A. Chen, she founded the Eleanor Thompson Center for Dignity and De-Escalation, a federally supported program dedicated to training police officers in empathy, restraint, and cultural awareness. The initial funding came from public donations that poured in after the verdict, nearly $2 million in 6 weeks. The center's first class graduated that fall. 500 officers trained, many from departments with histories of tension and mistrust. At the ceremony, Eleanor spoke softly but with conviction. "You cannot teach humanity in a courtroom," she said. "You teach it in how you speak to a stranger, how you hold your anger, and how you remember the weight of every word said under authority." The audience rose in applause, some with tears in their eyes. Marcus stood in the back, watching his mother speak, and felt something shift inside him. For months, he'd carried the dual burden of son and director, protector of his mother, defender of justice. But now, as he saw her commanding a room not through fear or force, but wisdom, he understood that justice wasn't about vengeance. It was about restoration. That night, he visited his father's grave. Rain tapped softly against the headstone. "She did it." "Dad," he whispered. She turned pain into policy. Meanwhile, Derek's world continued to shrink and reshape. After 7 months, he received a letter from his wife, Laura. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't forgiving either. Just final. "I loved you once for your strength," she wrote, "but I'm leaving you for the man you became when you lost it." His son Tyler never visited. He heard from another inmate that the boy had changed his last name. It cut deeper than any sentence. When Derek was finally released 2 years later, he walked out carrying nothing but a single folder of notes and the manuscript of a small memoir he had written during his nights of quiet reflection. He titled it, "From Badge to Shame, Against All Odds." The book was picked up by a non-profit publisher that donated all profits to the Eleanor Thompson Center. It sold 50,000 copies in its first year. In interviews, Derek refused to defend himself. "I hurt someone who had every right to live in peace," he told one journalist. "If you're looking for excuses, you won't find them here." The nation had already moved on to other headlines. But in D.C., his name had become a lesson, not a curse, at the center. New recruits studied his case as part of the first module, de-escalation and the cost of arrogance. His story became a mirror in the classroom, a warning in uniform, on the first anniversary of the trial. Eleanor returned to the diner with Grace. Booth 6 was still there, polished and quiet. Linda Ramirez had hung a small plaque on the wall. "Dignity sat here." Eleanor smiled softly. "You see, Grace," she said, "even pain can leave a light behind." Grace nodded, wiping a tear. That night, Marcus joined them for dinner. As they sat together, a young officer from MPD entered the diner, recognized Eleanor, and quietly approached. "Ma'am," he said nervously, "I just finished the first training class at your center. It changed how I see the badge." Eleanor smiled. Then it worked. Outside, the city lights reflected on wet pavement, and for once, the streets of Washington felt calm. Justice had done its work, but what lingered was something greater. The quiet triumph of a woman who turned a moment of humiliation into a movement of humanity. 1 year after the trial, Washington felt different. The same city that once pulsed with protest now carried a quiet sense of correction, as if justice had finally taken a breath it had been holding for decades. The morning light spilled through the trees along Constitution Avenue, where banners hung from lampposts reading Eleanor Thompson Center, First Anniversary Ceremony. The crowd gathered outside the new brick building that stood proudly in Anacostia, built on the site of an old precinct known for complaints that were never investigated. Now, it had become something entirely new, a sanctuary for reform, a place where police officers, teachers, and students learned together how to listen before they shouted, how to pause before they drew their weapons. Inside, portraits of Eleanor lined the entrance hall, but she had insisted that her own image appear only once, in the corner, beside a photograph of her late husband, Harold, and a bronze plaque engraved with her favorite words, "We don't need better laws, we need better hearts." Eleanor stood on the steps that morning, her hand resting lightly on the podium. She wore her cobalt blue coat, the same one from the courthouse, now a quiet symbol of dignity and endurance. Her son Marcus stood behind her in a dark suit, flanked by the mayor, D.A. Sophia Chen, Commissioner Vasquez, and dozens of new recruits who had completed the center's first year of training. Reporters adjusted their microphones as she began to speak, her voice gentle but steady. "When I was a girl," she said, "my mother told me that respect can't be demanded, it must be shown. A year ago, I was struck for no reason other than being seen as less than human. Today, I stand on ground built by everyone who refused to accept that lie." The applause was soft, reverent. "We cannot change history," she continued, "but we can teach it differently. That is what this place stands for, a lesson written not in anger, but in renewal." As she finished, Marcus stepped forward to present her with a small black box. "On behalf of the city and the Bureau," he said, his voice thick with pride, "I present you with the key to the city of Washington, D.C., for courage that redefined what justice looks like." The crowd rose in applause, some chanting her name, others simply wiping tears. Eleanor smiled but said quietly, "The key belongs to everyone who dared to watch that video and say, 'Enough.'" Elsewhere that same morning, in a modest halfway house on the edge of Alexandria, Derek Harlan packed a small duffel bag. His parole was ending. The walls around him were bare except for a single poster that read, "Humility is freedom." On his bed sat a stack of unsold copies of his memoir, From Badge to Shame, and a letter addressed to the Eleanor Thompson Center. He sealed it carefully, the handwriting rough but deliberate, inside. The note read, "Mrs. Thompson, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know the money from the book is yours. Use it to teach someone not to become me." He paused before signing his name, then added 3 words beneath it. "Thank you anyway." At noon, the city's local station aired a live interview with one of the center's new instructors, a young officer named Jordan Pierce, who had once patrolled under Harlan's supervision. People ask if we can really change police culture. He said, "I tell them. I watched a man destroy his career because he couldn't control his pride. I also watched the woman he hurt build something that changed mine." The legacy of that single diner slap had stretched far beyond D.C. within a year. Over 200 departments nationwide had adopted Eleanor's curriculum on de-escalation and empathy. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division reported a 30% drop in civilian complaints in participating cities, and for the first time in modern history, MPD passed a full federal compliance audit with 0 violations. Reporters called it the Eleanor effect, but to her, it was simply the ripple of decency, something she believed every human heart was capable of. Once reminded, that evening, the anniversary dinner was held in the courtyard of the center. Strings of lights hung between the trees, and the air was filled with laughter and gospel music. Grace Wilkins sat near the front, her cane leaning against her chair, proudly wearing a button that read, "Booth 6 Forever." She winked at Eleanor. "Look at you now. Honey, you turned a bruise into a blueprint." Eleanor chuckled softly. "I didn't turn anything. I just refused to let hate have the last word." Later that night, as the guests dispersed, Marcus walked his mother back to her car. "You know, Ma," he said, "people keep calling you an activist, a reformer, a hero." She looked up at him, smiling faintly. "Titles don't matter. Baby, you can't legislate kindness, but you can live it loud enough for others to hear." She touched his cheek. "You did good, too. You brought the law where it belonged. Back to people," as the city lights shimmered in the distance. Marcus thought of his father again, of that summer in 1974 when justice had failed them. Now, 50 years later, it had come full circle, not in revenge, but in redemption. "He'd be proud of you," Marcus said softly. Eleanor smiled. "No, baby. He'd be proud of us," weeks later. The city unveiled a mural on the side of Capitol Diner, where everything began. It showed Eleanor standing with one hand raised, not in defense, but in peace. Below it were the words, "Dignity can't be slapped away," and somewhere in a small bookstore across town, Derek Harlan's memoir sat on a wooden shelf, next to a stack of pamphlets from the Eleanor Thompson Center. A woman browsing paused to read the titles, realizing they told 2 sides of the same story, one of destruction, one of grace, as the year drew to a close. Eleanor returned to the diner for lunch with Grace. Booth 6 gleamed under the afternoon light. On the wall beside it, a plaque read, "In honor of Eleanor Thompson, teacher, mother, citizen." She smiled quietly, tracing the edge of the plaque with her fingers. "You know, Grace," she said, "I used to think justice was something you win, but maybe it's just something you keep choosing. Every morning, every day, every life you touch. Outside, children passed by, laughing, unaware they were walking through a city changed forever by one woman who refused to turn away. One son who turned pain into purpose, and one slap that taught the nation the true sound of dignity. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share it so more people can hear stories that matter. Justice begins with awareness. And awareness begins with you.